So thank you very much, all of you, for your presentations. I think this set the tone for hopefully a very nice panel discussion now. So firstly, there was a question from the audience that I think directed at Sue Laughlin. Sue, can you please describe the formal relationship or structure between the research and operational aspects of your work? Specifically, how does the research formally connect to monitoring, alerting, and emergency management, particularly response and recovery? And I think you addressed that in a general sense, but I think this question perhaps is looking for something a little more formal. Can you address that, Sue?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what context this is in particular. I guess for volcanoes in general, the volcano community is underpinned, of course, by what's often known as volcano observatories, which are very often housed in geological surveys, sometimes in universities and sometimes in Met offices. And these are operational. They vary very widely in their size and their funding. Some, of course, we're talking here with the USGS, very well established, but then there are other countries around the world which are still trying to establish monitoring and still trying to establish volcano observatories. So, you know, any kind of research that VGS does around the world is always with whatever country, whatever location we're in, it's always within that mandate, with that mandated institution, whatever stage that it's at. So whether it's an established institution or whether it's an incipient volcano observatory, which is true in many places. In terms of alerting, so for volcano observatories, where they're established, of course, there's 24/7 real-time monitoring, and volcano observatories, again, have a very varied range of means in which to raise alerts and draw attention to particularly the status of volcanoes. And volcano observatories, of course, also issue hazard maps, sometimes forecasts as well. And sometimes with alerting, many volcano observatories are very embedded in the populations around the volcanoes. So the alerting may come from community monitoring and community participants in volcano monitoring. All volcano observatories and mandated institutions have very good relationships with their usually their local civil protection authorities, as well as national civil protection authorities and the risk management system. And that's over many years. I would just say that there seems to be evidence now that the presence of volcano observatories has kind of, for example, reduced the number of fatalities per eruption in recent decades, which is a really important point that points to the value of these institutions. Research is a really important part of this. So volcano observatories work very closely with universities, locally and internationally. And I think as a community, the volcano community has become increasingly good at managing these relationships between local to national to international and operational and research. So I don't know whether that answers your question. It's a bit of a broad brush response, but yeah, if there's any more questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Sue. Actually, there was a question that I posed to Yoshishiro-san along similar lines. Unfortunately, he's not able to participate in the discussion, but he did actually provide a written response. So maybe I can just share that. He said that in order to develop appropriate plans and effectively carry out warnings and evacuations, that we, in this case, the Japanese Geological Society, believes that it's important to engage with local residents living in hazardous areas through efforts to communicate scientific information to them on a regular basis. So, and he provided the example of the Usu volcano in Hokkaido, where the information was routinely communicated from the research side to the Japan Meteorological Agency, and in turn communicated to local residents. And it's the local residents, as Sue suggested, and the observatories around them that actually have the responsibility for the specifics of the response and having their own response plans. So I think that also suggests this information being developed, the scientific information is developed, but in order to not only communicate it but develop that trust in using it and responding has to be developed locally with the engagement of those communities. So that is in line with the Japanese experience.
Absolutely. I think for volcano observatories in particular, I think there's a real strength that they have in that engagement locally up until nationally. So it's a real strength of the volcano community, I think, to be able to do that at different scales.
Right. Thank you, Sue. Okay, I'd like to turn to a question to Pak Matsur. Pak, I know Pak Matsur, I know it's getting even later for you, so I better get a question in. So I think, you know, one of the most impressive things about the work that you have done and have been coordinating in Indonesia has been in bringing together the technical institutions, the government departments, and international organizations to develop the agreements and framework for a national hazard map that would be well recognized, accepted, and used for the building and infrastructure codes. That's a massive effort. I think more than a decade went into just developing you might say the infrastructure and the the trust within that framework to actually make it work. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that and what were the major factors that actually helped you bring all of this together?
Thank you, Pak John. Can you hear me, Pak John?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First, we have common concern. We in 2004 we were shocked by Aceh earthquake with magnitude of 9.2, and then that resulted in casualties of more than 250,000 people died. And then we were shocked and we realized that, especially as engineer, we have to have better quality of earthquake resistant building and infrastructure in construction industry, including hazard map and then code and then implementation. And then due to this, then government of Indonesia through the Ministry of Public Work established National Center for Earthquake Studies that the main task is to coordinate institutions related with earthquake to sit together to mitigate an earthquake risk and to minimize. And then in one of this assignment is to develop and to update the seismic hazard map. And then other assignment is to update national code. We have just finished the for new building, follow the SEE, and then we are also now finishing the code for the existing evaluation of existing building. We already completed the code for bridge, and we are in this year we are finishing the code for underground structure. And then in team that was assigned to develop the 2017 National Seismic Hazard Map. The strong point that we feel is we got full support from the Minister of Public Work, Dr. Basuki Hadimulyono, the Minister of Public Work, and also Director of Research, that also from public block, Dr. Ari Morwanto, fully support the team. Dr. Ari Morwanto visited and invited several ministries and agencies. He came to other ministry, said, invite, and asked to participate. And this is that we think the one of key thing that result in the result that we can work together. Also, at this opportunity, I like to thank for the international collaboration for Dr. Mark Peterson and for Dr. Stephen Harmson that supporting us in using the USGS software. Dr. Nicholas Luko for advising us in deciding the fragility function. Also, Profil Kumins from ANU, and Pak John Yu and Dr. Marco Pagani for assisting us in using the OpenQuake software for verification to the USGS software. Thank you.
Monsieur, thank you very much. Yeah, this is a very, I think, you know, the fact that, you know, it often does take a huge shock for people to come together to make a difference. And the 2004 earthquake and tsunami, I think, was not only a huge shock for Indonesia, but for the entire world, really. And it was a huge catalyst for development of tsunami warning systems in particular. But I think it also triggered many improvements to building codes in other parts of the world. I have a question for Helen. Helen, the development of the regional European earthquake risk map was a first for Europe, and so it was a big effort to assure that the approach from the science through to the dissemination would be well coordinated and agreed. So one of the interesting things that or things that impressed me about the process was the major effort that went into the preparation of the hazard and risk maps and other products, but also the important role of the dissemination process. So there was a lot of discussion about everything from what colors the map should be on the maps through to you know, how that information would be prepared for different stakeholder groups. And of course, also recognizing that as this was a regional product, it was not to supersede arrangements that were within national governments, but it was complementary. So all of these things were part of the mix. Could you share some lessons learned from that process?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, John. Well, you know well that process because we benefited from your contributions there as part of the review panel. So, as you mentioned, we worked closely with the communications group. They were really the ones that led this whole process of the products behind the European Seismic Hazard and Risk Group model. So, the communication group made us meet frequently, and they were really the ones driving the list of all of the products that they felt that we needed to produce. And there really were a large number of products from the maps. So I showed the seismic risk index map in my presentation, but there were also fact sheets, press releases, videos, a whole update of the website, a really large number of products, and a lot of discussion on the text that goes with all of these things over the wording. We had, as I mentioned, review panels. We had yourself reviewing the text and others. You know, there really were a lot of voices there. So that's a challenge, obviously, to listen to all of the feedback we were getting on how we should communicate these products and to reach a consensus. But I think one thing I learned was how long this took. I think in the future we would start this a lot earlier. So we focused mainly on the scientific products, on developing the hazard and risk models for many years before we even started thinking about how we were going to communicate them and what products. So I think going forward, I would make sure that we began that activity a lot earlier. And maybe another thing that I've learned actually much more recently, just in this last week, since the devastating earthquake in Turkey last week, was that in such a time, in such a post-event sort of crisis, emergency time, there isn't a lot of time for the media to read all of those products that we prepared. So we put a lot of effort into producing, as I mentioned, fact sheets, press releases, documentation, but it takes time to read. There's lots of caveats there, there's explanations of what's the difference between hazard and risk. And I can see that in such when maybe an article needs to be produced under pressure, we really need to produce some perhaps shorter, quicker, smaller fact sheets of bullets of information on our website and point people in the direction of that information.
Perhaps you could share with us maybe what might be a question that you wish you had anticipated.
So yeah.
Because I mean, you have the maps. The risk doesn't show up as particularly high for that part of the European map. So I'm wondering about the sorts of questions that may have come up that perhaps were surprising.
Yeah, I mean, there was a high level of risk in that map, perhaps not the highest in the whole of Europe, but it was high. I think questions such as why isn't Ukraine included? Why is this part missing? Why did we define Europe in that way? Those are the sort of questions I was seeing, which I would have liked to have had time to explain the background to.
Yeah, so they weren't the technical questions.
Not technical.
They were the more, you might say, the more political questions.
Yes, yeah.
That were hard to anticipate. Yeah. Okay.
But I suppose also some technical questions on why in certain areas in Italy, why you were seeing larger areas of risk, where maybe not understanding that there is the exposure there that also drives the risk. So yeah, I think that would have helped.
Okay, I'd like to turn to, let's see, we have say 6 or 7 minutes. I'd like to, I have perhaps a general question here. Your presentations all highlighted the need for collaboration across science disciplines and across organizations within countries, also within regions and internationally, as well as for coordination across government ministries, the public, and so forth, to bring science to the user or stakeholder for disaster risk reduction application. So in your experience, what have been the biggest challenges in these 3 areas? So one is in developing consensus on the science. Second is delivering the science, say through earthquake and hazard risk assessments. So that's a product of the science. And third, assuring that those results are both useful and used in policies and planning. Now, the third one is not really directly, say, our responsibility as scientists, but we are providing information and we are supporting that process. So who would like to take on that question or any part of it?
I'm happy to give it a go if you don't mind me. I've already been speaking for some time, but
you're warmed up.
More consensus in the science. So I think we learned through the development of the European seismic hazard and risk models that consensus is not always possible, and it can delay the process quite significantly when you try and reach consensus. So back in 2013, when the first European seismic hazard model was released, we very much were striving for consensus. That was the terminology and the objectives that we had back then. And I think with this latest model, with the 2020 model, we stepped away a little bit or to the side from consensus and focused more on developing a model that was data-driven, that was reproducible, transparent, which could be tested. And so I think the focus going forward is on having models that can be tested, and hopefully that will bring us closer to a consensus on the models, because it's a more objective evaluation of the model. Yeah.
Yeah. No, go. Well,
Shall I carry on the other points?
Well, I think you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, please. I think you partly addressed the second part on delivering
As well.
But go ahead.
And so then just on, it was on making the results useful for policies and planning and used. So again, with the European Seismic Hazard Model, we were lucky in that from the beginning, the objective was to have it used in an update to the Seismic Design Code, the European Seismic Design Code, Eurocode 8. So to have it as an informative annex of Eurocode 8. But back in 2013, this didn't happen. Unfortunately, that model was not accepted by the community. And so I suppose what we learned was that we needed to work with, in this case, it was a committee, a Eurocode 8 committee, who were responsible for drafting the next version of this design code. So we had to work with them from the beginning to share as we were developing the model and having common meetings and deadlines just to make sure that it would then be accepted.
Right. So you brought them in early.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sue. Okay. Let me go to Sue. Okay, Monsieur, please. Your mic is on. Go.
Okay, thank you. I like also to share my experience. This is my experience that may be different in other countries. That the biggest challenge in developing a consensus on the science is how to synergize the multidiscipline that has that come from multi-stakeholder, come from different departments and agencies to settle to the consensus. And in my experience, it's time consuming. We need a lot of debate, and often there is party that is not open to other opinion, and it just we have to repeat again and time consuming and be patient. This is, I think, the biggest challenge. And then regarding the delivering the science through the hazard and risk assessment, that I feel that the difficulties in translating the sign language into more practical and easy to understand language to deliver to various stakeholders that come from different backgrounds. Thanks, Pak John.
And could you lastly, can you say something about how, you talked about the codes being developed, but how do you feel this information is actually being implemented? Is it working in Indonesia?
Okay, yes, we have for the developing country, we have problem with this, that we feel that the pentahelix that consists of government, scientists, business entities, race communicator, media, and community has to enforce the implementation. We feel, especially in Indonesia, like in the remote area, far from the capital city, the enforcement is not as strong as in the near capital city. So and you know that earthquake source is distributed randomly. This is the big challenge. I think that it's important that to enforce the of the policy and regulation in implementing the code. And learning from the last earthquake in Cianjur last November, it's a small earthquake, 5.4, but quite significant effect. Is mostly is due to the collapse of building, and this is the thing that the enforcement of the code and practices very critical. Thank you, Pak John.
Thank you much, sir. I'd like to give Sue. I think we have 1 minute. If you could perhaps address. I'm sorry, we're running quick out of time, but if you could tackle that, great. quickly.
Very quickly then, just on the developing consensus, I agree with Helen. There are situations where, of course, it's very difficult and maybe you don't even need to. Expert elicitation, some methods, of course, are there deliberately to try and accommodate things like that. But I think in order to make sure there's a common understanding, which when you're working across disciplines and across sectors is most important, the value of having terminologies and definitions of terms and so on is really important. So, you know, the great value of things like the UNDRR terminologies and so on. And then in terms of assuring things are useful and used, you know, making sure they're co-designed from the start with users, making sure they're part of the design process, they're setting out their needs, and that you're changing, you know, your preconceived ideas, or you're open to that, you're listening and modifying the science to meet their needs. So yeah, that's probably my minute. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you very much to all of you for your contributions. Back to you, Bill.